Do we want to kick it off, Lisa, or do we want to give it another minute for folks to join?
We could, it's 2:02. I am going to follow your lead this time, Brian. Whenever you're ready.
I'm going to say 2:02 is on time for Congress, and we get going because we got a great panel, and I am so excited that everybody's on. When Lisa Blunt Rochester found me on the floor a little over 2 years ago now, talking about where are there areas where Democrats and Republicans can come together. No better area than talking about our workforce development. We've done a series of sessions here in the Future Work Caucus, and I'm excited about our conversation today, focusing in on rural America. 1 in 5 Americans, about 60 million people, live in rural America. There's unique challenges in our rural communities, the digital divide, education, employment, workforce development. And I think the future of work fits right in that. In Southeast Wisconsin, we make the Case tractors that are over my shoulder on this side, the Case Magnums that plow the fields across America. And so not only do we have the impact flowing through into our cities, into our manufacturing operations and other areas, but ultimately in rural America, we have some unique challenges in workforce, like I said, in technology and other areas. And I'm so excited to hear the conversation. I'm going to keep my remarks short so we can have more time in the questions with our distinguished panelists. Excited to have everybody here, and I'll pass it right over to my colleague, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester.
Thank you so much, Representative Stile, and thank you to everyone that is joining us today. I want to thank him for his leadership and also for his willingness. We tried to be very collaborative, our teams, as we come up with these topics. And this one was one that both of us really felt very passionately and strong about. So first of all, thank you to Representative Stile and your team, and thank you to the presenters and all of the guests that are joining you on this timely and important roundtable. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that all of our communities are connected, and that if we all want to thrive, we need to recognize that. And now, some of you may know in Delaware, I serve at large. I represent the entire state. And a lot of people don't know that Delaware is urban, suburban, and rural. You might also know that we were the first peach state before Georgia. We have soybeans, corn, strawberries, and also we have different industries that are making some of the most incredible scientific breakthroughs. We also have more chickens than people. It's actually said that we have 200 chickens to every person in Delaware. So agriculture is big. And so when I came to Congress, it was really important to me to make agriculture a priority, becoming the first member in 120 years from my state to get on the Ag Committee. I'm now a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and it continues to be one of my top priorities, even on issues such as delivering high-speed broadband to parts of our state, particularly Southern Delaware. And while we're working on an infrastructure package right now at the moment, while we pump the much needed resources into our states to support and benefit our schools, our workplaces, and communities, these investments are only the beginning. We must ask ourselves, as we build out our infrastructure, how do we ensure that our rural communities are not left behind and that they stay connected and are actively engaged in our increasingly digital future? Rural America plays an important role in our country's economy, including farming and agriculture. And while most people may think of agriculture as just food, it's also textiles, biofuels, cosmetics. And as we think about the future of rural America and agriculture in our communities, the workforce that sustains our food security must be at the center of policy conversations as well. In rural Delaware, we are faced with a shortage of qualified and skilled workers. And as a country, we need to think about how we can improve our education and workforce development systems to meet the needs of rural America. We need to broaden our career pathways to include transportation, distribution, and logistics. And when it comes to agri-science education, we need to prepare students for careers from ag mechanics to livestock production to heavy STEM-based careers. Fortunately, our very own HBCU, Delaware State University, is pioneering its own ed farming program on campus to integrate technology with farming in the curriculum and create pipelines for more Delawareans to enter the industry. It's vital that we have these kinds of investments and that we also be inclusive. And I'm so excited to hear from our remarkable presenters who will highlight how Congress can better respond to the needs of rural Americans as we build back better. Again, I want to thank our presenters. I want to thank my co-chair, and I want to thank all of you for spending your time on such an important day for our conversation. And let's move to opening remarks from our presenters. Our first presenter is Farah Ahmad, Chief of Staff for the Rural Development Office at USDA. Farah, I will turn the mic over to you.
Thank you so much. Especially a thank you to Representatives Blunt Rochester and Stile for the invitation to speak today, and truly really appreciate the caucus's engagement on this issue. My name is Farah Ahmad. I'm the Chief of Staff Rural Development here at USDA. And across USDA, but particularly within our mission area within rural development, we know that issues in rural America cannot be fixed with a one-size-fits-all approach. And often the best solutions are found on the ground. That's where we see a lot of innovation, creativity. And as was mentioned before, we know that that's needed because rural America, it's not a monolith. Rural communities contain an impressive amount of diversity that's economically, racially, culturally, geographically. And our partners in these communities are really critical to understanding what these communities live every day and what solutions are going to work for them. We know that economies in particular in rural communities are diverse. Only 1 in 5 jobs are agricultural based across rural America. And so while there's a ton of diversity in those economies, we know that solutions have to be diverse too. That's why our partners are our most critical assets. And our ability to effectively support local economic development depends significantly on the sophistication and effectiveness of those local partners. Those local partners are, chambers of commerce, local economic development organizations, community colleges, and other nonprofits. And we believe that that's true, not just for us at USDA Rural Development, but for federal economic development efforts generally. But our decades of experience at USDA, it really supports that growing that expertise of those local partners and their capacity and their ability to carry out economic development work is central to the effectiveness of our efforts as well, doing place-based economic development. So, both in the House and in the Senate, FY22 appropriations bills, it calls for funding for an initiative called Strikeforce. And that's an initiative that we believe will allow rural development to really sink deeper roots into the rural communities that we serve and that we work with, and really get to the heart of the issues that they're facing, which we know are unique. And figuring out other ways to really grow their expertise of those local partners and of our rural development staff to support top-notch regional development work, we think is the path to really promoting inclusive rural prosperity. And we know that those needs are diverse, as I mentioned before, but at the foundation of that, ensuring quality infrastructure, it is really foundational to that regional development work. And that's broadband infrastructure, workforce, housing, water and sewer, just to name a few, much of which we do support at USDA Rural Development. And these programs that we have are all about providing infrastructure, but we know that sometimes they can be too small or a little bit too inflexible, and frankly, sometimes too complicated for communities that are experiencing a lot of economic distress, and those programs aren't always accessible. So we actually see the need to modernize our rural development programs as a key way in supporting rural economies and the rural workforce. We want our programs to be more flexible and more IT based. We still have some programs run on paper applications. And we also know that we need to expand our boots on the ground. So we say one of our biggest strengths at USDA Rural Development is that we are field based. So our staff actually lives in the communities that we serve and are a part of those rural communities. But we do know we need to expand our presence. Our programs have increased in funding over the years, but our staff has actually decreased. And I just want to say we really look forward to working with Congress to do our work as best as we can to improve the quality of life in the rural parts of your districts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ahmad. Really excited your comments about building the bridges between government and non-government entities. I think it's a great segue into our next speaker, John Holyvote, Director of Government Affairs of the Dairy Business Association. John?
Thank you, Congressman. My name is John Holyvote, as the Congressman said. I work for both the Dairy Business Association, which is a Wisconsin-based dairy trade association, made up of farmers as well as allied industry that supports the dairy industry, and also Edge Dairy Farmer Cooperative, which has farmer members throughout the upper Midwest. We represent farmers, dairy farmers who ship their milk to private milk processors in that region. So really an honor to be here and appreciate the invitation from Representative Stile and Representative Blunt Rochester. I can tell you that in some ways, the labor shortages we've seen in the dairy industry feel like a canary in the coal mine for the shortages that are being seen elsewhere in rural manufacturing, now well beyond just rural America too. Many different segments of the economy, even in the suburbs and in urban areas of the country, are facing serious shortages. We've had those for 20 years, and we sure would like to do something about it. One of the things that we see is probably integral to fixing that issue and addressing that issue is some sort of work on farm workforce that involves a year-round visa where folks could work on dairy farms and not only would provide our existing workforce with a legal status, but also a path for other folks who want to come here and work in an agricultural field. At the same time, some of the challenges we face in running our businesses in rural America, including the lack of adequate rural broadband, if we could address that for us, we could also provide new and interesting opportunities for others, both to work rurally and also to telecommute while living in rural America. We enjoy the benefits of a fantastic quality of life in rural America, and it'd be excellent if more people could take advantage of that while working remotely. Thank you.
You're on mute, Congresswoman.
Thanks. It wouldn't be a Zoom without somebody being told you're still on mute. First of, thank you. Thanks so much, John. Our next speaker is Alex Comardell, the Director of Workforce Policy at the Joint Center. Alex, you're up.
Wonderful, and thank you so much. I'm Alex Comardell, Director of Workforce Policy at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. And at the center, we develop research and policy solutions concerning the future of work in Black communities. And we've done so decisively in the rural South as well. So thank you, really excited about this discussion today and happy to engage with you all on this topic through a racial equity lens. Just to reflect briefly, even as the country was experiencing its lowest unemployment rate and longest period of economic expansion in recent history, Black rural communities fell further behind others in terms of wages, employment, and other measures of economic security. And opportunities for older Black workers to compete with younger workers who have adapted to new technologies or have greater access to training resources to upskill make the future of work complicated. Over 60% of Black workers in the Black rural South have a high school diploma or less, and they make up the largest share of those who are in the group that is more likely to be in jobs vulnerable to automation. Our analysis of the future of work in the Black rural South found that over half of all private sector workers in the Black rural South work in the 6 industries with the highest potential for automation, compared to only a third of US private sector workers. And moreover, some recent analysis found that 46% of Black households lack broadband access compared to 28% of white households. And while that gap is large, the lack of access for both groups is unacceptable in the 21st century. So these are just some of the factors that are driving our concerns for the future of work discussions, adding nuance, suggesting that it's not just about the takeover of robots, it's about creating employment opportunities and pathways for those that have been historically underrepresented from quality employment. And I'm looking forward to sharing more of our ideas with you all on today's call.
Thank you, Alex. And Brian, if I could just share that we're going to drop in the chat the report that the Joint Center put together as well. And I'll turn it back to you, Brian.
Terrific. Thank you, Alex. We're going to jump right over into the private sector with Tim Martin, North America Human Resources Director for Case New Holland Industrial. Tim?
Thank you, Brian. As Brian mentioned, my name is Tim Martin, and I have been, well, it hit me when I was putting together my bio, how long I've been in manufacturing in general, but started out at Chrysler Corporation in Detroit, worked for a media company in New York, worked for BP in Chicago, before now working for Case New Holland in Wisconsin, specifically Racine. And so been with the company for about a little over 4 years, but really coming up to speed with a lot of the challenges that we're here to discuss. Coming out of the pandemic, or as we're struggling through it, and facing the incredible demand that we've had from our agricultural customers. It's been an incredible challenge, not only to find skilled workers, but also unskilled workers in our rural communities where we have a lot of our manufacturing facilities. So some of the challenges that we face broadly as an industry is dealing with some of the ebbs and flows of the demand, but certainly when it's at its peak, labor shortages, specifically some particularly skilled labor shortages, and really looking forward to see how this group, or how we could partner with Congress really to address that. Up until now, we've really relied on, and right in this present moment, developing in-house or in-company or in-plant solutions to how to bridge that skill gap. But certainly would look forward to partnering with government agencies or tech skill companies or high schools even, to really help prime the pump, if you will. So we've got the next generation of Case New Holland employees ready and willing to jump in and help us provide the equipment that our farmers so desperately need right now.
Thank you. And our next speaker will be Adam Wolf, Dr. Adam Wolf, founder and chief scientist at Arable Labs.
Thank you very much for convening this important topic. My name is Adam Wolf, as you said, representing Arable Labs. And our work is often at the intersection of new technology and traditional knowledge. So we're often faced with who are the types of workers who will be empowering agricultural supply chains in the future. Agricultural technology adoptions usually driven by returns to labor, like yield per person, and not necessarily returns to land, yield per acre. Farming is hard and people prioritize things that make their life easier. This trend exists against a backdrop of people leaving agriculture. In every generation, about half of what the census calls farmers leave the profession, but the amount of land farmed stays relatively stable. So the same people are farming twice as much land. These two trends have put a sharp focus on what we would recognize as work productivity tools. At my company, Arable, this includes remote monitoring of fields to prioritize site visits and reduce road time for workers, mobile apps to receive alerts on extreme events, data tools that enable people to continuously learn and improve performance. Another key pinch point in ag is labor availability, which is an existential issue in places where harvest is largely by hand. Californians voted to include farm workers in the categories that are paid a minimum wage and premium for overtime. This has led to a desire to enhance their skills or otherwise professionalize the agricultural workforce, which is becoming in many ways the opposite of a commoditized workforce. Here too, the workers are using digital tools that extend their reach. We often describe this as Iron Man, not Terminator. It's not that workers are being replaced by robots so much as superpowered with tools that let them look into the future, the past, or the next county at the press of a button. I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss this and more in our roundtable coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wolf. Iron Man, not Terminator, possibly the best line so far in our discussion. We'll jump right in to Chuck Spencer, Executive Director at Growmark. Chuck?
Thank you for this session today. I'm Chuck Spencer, Executive Director, Government Relations for Growmark and the FS system. We're a farmer-owned agricultural cooperative serving almost 400,000 customers in North America, providing agronomy, energy, facility engineering, logistics, grain marketing, and we operate Seedway, the largest full-line seed company in the United States, and headquartered in Bloomington, Illinois. Rural America needs a reliable workforce. Attracting top talent to fill positions in production, sales, transportation, and overall agricultural supply chain is a priority, and more jobs are available than applicants. And we understand firsthand the importance of enhancing existing community services, education, and recreation systems to retrain and attract top talent. Access to high-speed internet communications networks is critical. The need for connectivity is real, and a lack of high-speed internet and communication networks impede the development of talent, healthcare, commerce, and growth of rural communities that provides the economic opportunities for career advancement. In fact, we're using that high-speed internet network today for this discussion. Community colleges can be the training ground of future careers and trade jobs. We're witnessing increased need for skilled labor using technology and especially in agriculture. The Growmark system has developed partnerships with community colleges to help train prospective employees in nutrient and crop protection application equipment, like you see behind me, as well as tech-based grower platforms. And our research shows future customers will demand increased technology in all aspects of their operations, and we need that skilled workforce to fulfill those demands. And then supply chain resiliency. Our current experience clearly exposes the need for more efficient water ports, roadways, river transportation, and air travel to move all the goods demanded in our supply chain now and in the future. And we must highlight that truck drivers are in tremendous demand, and hopefully we could expand a pilot program to attract those 18 to 21-year-old drivers after high school. So thank you for this opportunity and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Chuck. We're going to do a small change of agenda because we have Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick from the great state of Pennsylvania who's able to join us. I know he's going to get pulled away a little bit later with everything that's coming before us in Congress. And so if we can, I would love to just give you a couple moments here, Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick.
And I want to say hello to Brian as well. He is my classmate. So good to see you, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see both of you. I just wanted to hop on real quick and thank everybody here for joining us today to provide your insight on all the issues impacting our rural communities. To Representative Blunt Rochester and Stile for putting the roundtable together. We all know COVID-19 exacerbated the already large gap for individuals needing more investment in broadband, which we're dealing with now with infrastructure, workforce development, research infrastructure, and new facilities for schools. One of the many reasons why I'm, with many of my colleagues, co-sponsored the Rural STEM Education Research Act, which specifies federal scientific research and development efforts towards STEM workforce development and specifically rural STEM education. Moreover, it directs the Office of Science and Technology Policy to establish a broadband research and development working group. Our rural communities are severely lacking in broadband investments. It's been a problem for a long time now. And the funding and development continues to go towards those areas where broadband is already established. We should be focusing on our rural areas that have no broadband at all. Certainly a big push in a lot of the infrastructure work that I've done and many of my colleagues have done on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Job growth in rural America has always been a priority of this caucus, but even more so post-COVID-19. And we need to invest in our youth and create economic prosperity for all parts of our country. And the rural areas, as we all know, tend to get left behind. So just wanted to stop in and say I appreciate all of our guest speakers for being here. Very interested in hearing your insight on these critical issues and how we can, we on the Future of Work Caucus can create bipartisan solutions. Just wanted to, again, thank Representative Blunt-Rochester and Representative Stile for showing that true bipartisan spirit, which, by the way, exists a lot more than you think. It doesn't get a whole lot of media coverage, but it does exist, and it's alive and well here in our Congress. So thank you, Brian and Lisa. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Fitzpatrick. And I now have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Mark Rembert, Director of the Rural Innovation Network at the Center for Rural Innovation. You're up next, Doctor.
Thank you very much. As the Congresswoman said, I'm Mark Rembert. I'm the Director of the Rural Innovation Network at the Center on Rural Innovation. CORI is a national nonprofit organization that works with a growing network of 25 rural communities across all 4 time zones that are working to build inclusive digital economies through scalable tech entrepreneurship and digital workforce development. And so today I'd like to speak briefly about technology jobs. Because technology jobs will really form the backbone of the future of work, creating the technologies and tools that drive automation. Already, these jobs are among the fastest growing and highest paying jobs in the economy. But the presumption has generally been that these technology jobs are only for people in large metropolitan areas. Since 2010, 97% of tech jobs have been created in metro areas. And as a result, rural America only accounts for 5% of the tech workforce and has largely been left out of the digital economy. Over the past 18 months, we've had a preview of how things could be different. Since the start of the pandemic, more than 75% of the tech workforce have worked remotely, experiencing one of the lowest rates of unemployment during the pandemic. This experience has shown that more work than previously believed can be done from anywhere. When rural areas have access to high-speed broadband, we believe that the future of work, and particularly remote work, offers a new opportunity for expanding high-quality jobs and career pathways. But seizing this opportunity requires immediate action, as remote work is a bit of a double-edged sword. The features of remote work that create potential opportunities for rural workers also creates competition. In fact, we already see that many employers in rural areas are sourcing tech workers from metro areas through remote work and outsourcing. We estimate that in 2019, more than 50,000 tech jobs were outsourced from rural areas by rural manufacturing companies alone. If this dynamic continues, then rural America could fall further behind. In our experience, we find that rural communities need to adopt a variety of strategies working in concert together to take advantage of remote work, including expanding broadband access, ensuring access to affordable housing, investing in education, changing the way that we do workforce development, and investing in quality of life. I look forward to discussing how Congress can support these strategies.
Thank you very much. And our final panelist will go right to Chuck Connor, President and CEO of the National Council of Farm Cooperatives. Chuck?
Thank you, Congressman, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with each one of you. There's been a lot of material covered here already that I would like to associate myself with. Certainly from a farmer co-op perspective, I join my colleagues, Chuck and John, in pointing out the strength of farmer-owned co-ops in our rural areas. We have an employment base of over 200,000 people and a $10 billion payroll out there in rural America. You know, our owners are farmers. They're in the rural communities. Oftentimes these businesses are still there when other businesses have long gone somewhere else. And they are many times sort of the last vestige of smaller businesses in these rural communities. So we're strongly behind your effort to take a look at this and to analyze this topic in a very, very big way. I will just tell you again, please associate me and all of our co-ops with your comments on rural broadband. So critical to the fundamental future of jobs in rural America. I am headed to my family's own farm tonight in rural Indiana, and I will drive 20 miles multiple times every day in order to get to the closest hotspot in order to try and do a little bit of work that we take for granted oftentimes in our jobs that they don't out there. Let me just also say that it was mentioned, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. There is a big employment base out there in rural America that consists of those of foreign descent. Some are in the category of people who don't have legal status to be here. We need legal status for these folks. The foreign workers that work on our farms and ranches and our dairy farms support on an estimate of 3 to 4 additional jobs in these rural communities. They bring jobs. They don't take jobs from others. And finally, I'll just close with a quick comment about the president's recent announcement relative to mandatory vaccination for COVID and mandatory testing requirements. This is something that farmer co-ops have been very strongly behind. Our rural community businesses have supported. They've sponsored clinics. They've hosted clinics in their facilities. They've done all they can to promote these vaccinations. But the simple fact is that a big percentage of our workforce in rural America remains unvaccinated. We need to be very, very careful on our next steps relative to mandatory requirements in rural America, or we are going to have trouble in a already very, very tight employment base to a point where we're starting to worry about our ability to do what we do best, which is produce food and fiber for Americans in a very affordable way in good times and bad. So this is something we just need to be cautious about. And again, thanks for the opportunity.
Congresswoman Blunt Rochester, do you want to kick off with the first questions?
Yes, thanks. I'm just trying to get all of my cursors here. First of all, thank you so much, Chuck, for your comments. And I think it's a perfect segue. We're about to kick off the portion of it where it's conversation, where it's questions. And I also want to give kudos to this incredible panel for being able to get that many people to talk within 30 minutes. Truly, it was a miracle that we were able to achieve that and that we have a great amount of time here for questions. And I guess just to follow up on where Chuck left off, talking about the workforce, we've been fortunate to have this incredible panel, but also on our Zoom, we have Diana Tellefson-Torres, who is representing the United Farm Workers. Again, a vital part of the whole as how we succeed in rural America and how we succeed as a country. And so if I could ask my first question, I'm going to actually direct it to you, Ms. Tellefson-Torres. As technology, and first of all, let me make sure that you can hear me.
And I can hear you.
And I can hear you. Okay, awesome. So my question is, as you've heard the conversation a lot about technology and about automation, but as we continue to be integrating it into farming and manufacturing and other rural jobs, how does that impact farm workers? And what policy recommendations do you have for Congress? What do you want to tell us, myself and Representative Stile and the members of the Future of Work Caucus? And I'm going to just turn it to you. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Blunt Rochester, Congressman Stile, and fellow members of the caucus. Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to address you today. So in 2020, the agricultural industry generated $450 billion in cash receipts. Those are revenues that are possible thanks to the work that's performed by 2.4 million farm workers. Agricultural work is characterized by difficult and repetitive tasks that can result in injuries, whether it's on the field while handling heavy machinery
working with large animals or at heights. And it also involves exposure to pesticides. And as we're seeing extreme heat and wildfires, alarmingly, crop workers are 20 times more likely to die due to heat-related causes. And as we discuss mechanization, it's crucial to consider the criteria that motivate such investments and the social and economic consequences. So are we automating farm labor tasks to eliminate the role of workers in agriculture, or are we integrating technologies that not only increase output, but improve labor conditions and make agriculture a more attractive industry? We really balance these considerations with the reality that in about half of the US states, the rural population is declining. The USDA notes that rural population growth will depend on increasing net migration, an outcome that coincides with declines in rural unemployment and poverty. So the majority of farm workers are settled with families. They have US-born children here in the US. They contribute to local economies. So conversations about mechanization must account for worker displacement and the impacts of higher unemployment, poverty, and rural outmigration. On what Congress can do to improve conditions and strengthen protections for farm workers, we must stabilize the farm workforce by providing them a path to legalization, correct the historical exclusion of farm workers from the right to overtime pay, and ensure that the DOL swiftly establishes a standard to protect outdoor workers from heat illness and death. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. And I think it kind of dovetails into what Representative Stiles said was also the line of the day of the Iron Man versus Terminator, and that we actually are using tools. I know in my own state, I remember going into the kitchen of one of my farmers, and she actually had an iPad where she was looking at the irrigation system. She was monitoring crops. And so how do we use these tools that in a way that it creates safety, security, our quality of life? And so thank you so much for sharing that, particularly speaking on behalf of farm workers. And I'm going to turn it over to Congressman Stile.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think building on this idea of labor, one of the challenges we're seeing, and it came up in a couple of your comments from the panel, is the labor shortage that we're experiencing in the state of Wisconsin. We're seeing low unemployment, 3.9% at the end of August, but also a small decrease in labor participation down to about 66.5% in pretty much everywhere you go, whether or not it's on a farm, a dairy farm. In the state of Wisconsin, we have 6,700 dairy farms in our state, or manufacturing companies. We're seeing challenges on labor participation, broadly speaking, the labor market. And so if I could, maybe to kick this off, and if you agree here, Lisa, maybe we can get a couple people to chime in, because I think we have some great panelists that could talk on this, including Ms. Ahmad with USDA, as well as some of our dairy folks on here. But maybe I can start with Tim at Case New Holland, specifically asking him where you're seeing some of the challenges in rural America, and in particular, what you're doing on the manufacturing side to address some of these challenges, and in particular, if there's areas where you're working with local education leaders, in particular technical colleges.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Just to underscore the significant challenge we've had in finding labor thus far, since the beginning of the year, or where we ended up overall headcount last year, we've come up approximately 1,300 employees this year, which is really quite remarkable when I discuss that with my peers at other companies, and certainly with some of our suppliers who are having additional challenges. Ryan, you know, you're really very familiar with the Racine plant, so I can use that as an example. Thus far this year, we've come up about 200 employees, and we need about another 180 that will be hiring in the first quarter of next year. Given the low unemployment rate, it's a challenge to attract workers, and especially workers with the skill sets that are required for manufacturing the equipment that we do produce. So some of the things that we have done locally to try and meet those challenges ourselves. And number one, I'll point out that CNC machinists and welders across the United States and even Canada, as I have responsibility there, are worth their weight in diamonds because they cannot be found. So to address that, we've been partnering with Gateway Technical School, I'm sure you're familiar with that as well, to provide some in-house training to our non-skilled workforce so that we can develop them to become machinists or to become welders. And we're also doing that at our manufacturing facility in St. Nazianz, Wisconsin as well. So we've had to partner with local community and tech schools to utilize their trainers and talent to come in, train people on the job and within our facility. Ideally, we'd like to develop a longer term solution and a longer term program where we'll have those pools of labor available to us when necessary and not be in such a reactive mode as we are right now. But what we have been doing to address the shortages is really designing and implementing programs by partnering with local area tech schools to come into our plants and train our employees, where we might have some non-skilled, and by non-skilled I would say assembly workers, although they carry a high degree of skill themselves, but it gives them an opportunity to make a little bit more money, have a new or more interesting career path, and also then broaden their skills. So those are some of the things that we're doing in the plants that I believe you're familiar with, but also in all of our manufacturing facilities throughout the United States and Canada.
Jim, thanks. Would love to open it up, Lisa, if it's all right, to any of our other panelists to talk about the challenges they're seeing, the labor shortage, and ways that we can address this.
And I know Adam had his hand up after the first question, so it might be tied to this as well. So I'm not sure. And you're on mute.
And if I could, I don't mean to jump the route, excuse me, but one of the things that I think might be valuable is getting into the high schools and developing these programs there. When I was in high school, I took wood shop, but I'm not making any rocking chairs now. And so while that was interesting and rewarding class or skill for me to develop, it really wasn't applicable. Now, given the shortage of the skilled and semi-skilled trades, and haven't even really delved into the pure skilled trades, electricians type labor, if we could start pushing that down into our schools and partnering with them, I think that would go a long way to help develop not only interests in the field, but also really develop that pool that I think we're all struggling to find now.
Good insights, Tim. Lisa, who did you want to jump to next?
Adam had his hand up earlier.
I just was the remarks of Diana Tolleson-Torres and Chuck Connor resonated with me very strongly. And we hear a lot from our users and customers about agricultural labor. Arable, my company, is founded on the belief of the fundamental dignity and integrity of all people. And it can't be oversaid that when it comes to ag labor, everybody is compromised, both the workers and the employers. And to the extent that humane immigration policies for farm workers can be developed, really everyone would be grateful. I do want to speak, though, to the heat stress, though. I believe that there's wins to be found in improving worker safety from chemical and heat exposure, in part enabled by digital tools. As a response to the unprecedented heat waves on the West Coast, we are pushing out heat alerts that protect workers that are driven by local conditions and working with various input companies to develop spray decision support to ensure that all of those actions are done in the safest possible way. And so this, of course, thrives on the availability of the broadbands that we've also been talking about. So thank you very much.
Rep. Stile, did you want to go to John to round out that last question?
Sure. Yep. No, that'd be great.
Thanks. I would say we really have been struggling for a long time to find enough workers on our dairy farms. We offer competitive wages in some cases. I know of farms in Wisconsin that are offering starting salaries to their introductory milkers at $19 or $20 an hour, which we also have a unique challenge in that we are price takers, right? We can't always account for those labor costs and what we're going to be paid for the milk and the final product that we ship off of our farms. So it puts us in a really tough spot where we are really against potentially low commodity prices with no real control over those, and rising farm labor prices that don't seem to have really any end in sight to where they might go. There's also this interesting symbiosis between us and our rural manufacturers. One of the great things about animal agriculture, and not to badmouth any of the rest of agriculture, my other friends on here from there, but is that it is very labor intensive. So we keep a lot of jobs in rural America. A lot of the processing of our product, especially on the dairy side, it's done nearby at another labor intensive operation. So we're a great way to keep employment opportunities in rural America, but it doesn't work if we can't find the workers to do it. Another challenge for us, I think, in different parts of the state for sure, is adequate housing for those workers. We have some rural processors, rural manufacturers who want to expand, but no one's building houses in those rural communities. We actually know of dairy processors here in Wisconsin who have built apartment buildings. They've become landlords. They've gone into real estate development because they had no other options. In their rural community, no one was building housing for their workers. So they built housing for their workers and others in the community. So those are both real challenges. And I'm not entirely sure how we address that, except for some sort of program like Chuck mentioned, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, where we not only take care of our existing workforce, but also give us a pathway to bring new workers in on a rotational basis who wish to work here in the ag sector. One final challenge for us, I think, is just what some people perceive as the low status of this work. We've had farms lose workers to lower paying jobs that for some reason they thought seemed like they had a higher status. So someone might leave being a calf manager to go work as a CNA, even though she's going to take a pay cut to be that CNA. Because for some reason in her community, it's perceived as a higher, more or better job, so to speak. And that is on us to maybe do a better job of showing the value and both to the community and more broadly of the work that we do, so that people don't feel that need to make that choice between a job in agriculture and a job elsewhere.
I was just going to say, I know that, first of all, I'm glad you ended there, because I think, again, goes back to the value and dignity of work. And then I also was glad that you brought up housing. I've heard a theme go through a lot of the different speakers about housing, and it's something that we are hearing a lot about in my state as well, affordable quality housing and that connection to it. I was going to share that it kind of dovetails into Representative Stiles' question of Ms. Ahmad. I also had a question as well that you can answer his question and tie my question in here as well. But mine was in your comments, you talked about really modernizing rural development. And I think part of the reason why we have these sessions is, number one, we want to kind of have a diversity of perspectives, also to help us as members of Congress be able to really hear the voice of diverse groups. But right now, in addition to bills and appropriations, we also have an agency here. And so it'd be great to hear from you specifically a little bit about what modernization, what you mean by that. And also for other panelists, what would you say is something, if you have any recommendations that would be helpful for USDA to hear? So Ms. Ahmad, if you could share a little bit about the modernization, because I think it fits with the future of work.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. And it ties in a little bit to what I was going to mention in response to Representative Stiles' question, which is, you know, we certainly view our role, one of our major roles in terms of supporting rural communities is investing in infrastructure. Housing is a piece of that. We see quality affordable housing as a pillar for rural communities, and one that will support not only families, but workers to be able to thrive in their community and be able to make sure that they you know, can get to their jobs and have a safe place to come back to at night. But when you talk about modernization, I want to share a couple of things. So one, you know, we have over 50 programs at USDA Rural Development across the infrastructure pipeline. I mentioned some of them before: broadband, water, housing, community facilities. But you know, they can be fairly complicated to access in general. And some of them need that because, you know, some of them are loan programs. You've got to be able to pass a financial audit. But there are places where we think we can really modernize RD to make them more accessible, particularly to communities that historically haven't been able to access our program for a variety of reasons. And those are places we really want to get to. So, you know, one example that I mentioned earlier is some of our programs, you know, you still have to fill out a paper application to apply for some of our housing programs. Or if you want to, if you actually get through our housing program and you have a mortgage with us through our single family housing program, to check your balance, you may need to actually pick up the phone and call our call center. Now, I know many folks here can probably just do that on an app on their phone, and it would probably, you know, you probably would, you know, never call a call center to check your balance these days. And so those are simple tools that we know we need to have to make sure that we are giving the folks that we serve the best customer experience, and make sure they're getting the real-time information that they need to make decisions about using our programs. And then of course about, you know, actually being a customer if they choose to actually take advantage of them, like our housing programs. So we want to be more IT forward is, I guess, what I would say in a nutshell, to make sure that we are flexible, we're nimble, and we're as modern as any other community trust or community bank that folks would go to.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that question. And for those of you who are thinking of what you want to share with Ms. Ahmad, hold your thoughts for 1 second. I'd like to welcome to the Zoom room the chairman of the Education and Labor Committee, Representative Bobby Scott. And Mr. Chairman, if you have anything you'd like to add, we welcome you to this very big and diverse roundtable. There's been a lot of conversation about workforce development, about worker protections. If there's anything that you would like to share, please, the floor is yours.
Well, let me just thank you and Representative Steele for all your work on the future of work. You're giving us really good information about what needs to be done in terms of job training. As you know, the Build Back Better reconciliation bill that we reported has substantial job training, and we want to make sure that's used for the jobs that are actually going to exist 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now. We don't know how much of that job training money is going to survive all of the, we'll call it legislative process. But I want to just thank you and Representative Steele for your good work. Apologize for missing the first half because I was at Rules Committee. The committee has a couple of bills coming up. But again, just congratulate both of you on great work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Stile and I continue to stay on the drumbeat for people focusing on the future of work, because it really is actually now. So we thank you, and we know that you just came from Rules Committee and you may have to come and go, but we appreciate your participation. And now I'm going to go back. If there was anyone else who had any comments or things, I see Alex has his hand up as well from the Joint Center. If you'd like to respond.
Sure. I really just wanted to validate and just applaud some of what Farah mentioned around modernization, certainly in the housing side, but just in thinking about connecting dots between loan products offered through USDA and job creation. Some of the biggest challenges that a lot of farmers have is actual access to capital so they can scale operations and benefit or create a multiplier where they can hire more folks to work, in their facilities or on the farmlands. I have to say, Joint Center is based in DC. I'm actually based in Georgia. I've traveled all across 159 counties here in Georgia. And one of the biggest challenges that is lifted up whenever we talk to folks in the ag space is transportation barriers, getting to the local rural development office so that they can actually submit a loan application for capital to scale their businesses. So thinking in terms of modernization and the way that technology can support them, I'm just really, curious to know, obviously broadband being an issue in terms of any app type of service that can allow them to apply is going to be, something to justify more investment in broadband, obviously. But just wanted to lift that up as a big challenge that we continue to hear, especially with a lot of the ag workers being people of color, in particular, older workers who are on the cusp of maybe even giving away or selling their land because they can't get capital needed to expand operations or keep people on payroll. Getting the loans, easier access to the loans is definitely a big barrier that folks have expressed here in Georgia. And I don't think Chairman David Scott has made it onto the call yet, but I'm sure he's heard similar feedback as well.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Representative Stile.
That great comments a moment ago there, Alex, particularly on the importance of the need for access to capital. I sit on the House Financial Services Committee and spend a lot of time in that space. I think what you just said is spot on, that we need to make sure that we're getting access to capital, not only to our biggest cities, but also to some of our smallest communities. Let me shift gears slightly. I'm gonna ask Chuck Spencer you this question, but others are welcome to chime in. And something that's kind of front of mind to me is I go around to a lot of the farms in Wisconsin, looking at the changing in technology and the impact that has on the skills and preparation needed for employees. I'm thinking the automation we're seeing in the dairy industry. The Case Magnum tractor behind me is a lot different than the Case Magnum tractor that they would have been making 75 years ago in Racine, Wisconsin, and the skill sets that our workers need. Could you comment on kind of the development that you're seeing and what things we need to be doing from a policy perspective to adequately prepare individuals for the jobs of today, but also the jobs of the future?
That's a great point, and we've been touching on it. And automation is affecting everyone. And I think it is the opportunity. I think the skill sets, we're going to need people to be empowered to be able to not only work on the automated equipment that may come into our areas, but also how to set up, program, and then work with the fields that they're in. We've taken the opportunity to develop and utilize our own training platform, which is allowed to go into high schools. And we take that applicator that you see here, and you can actually sit in a seat, and it gives you real-time feedback, and you have screens on all sides of you, much like you see on the NASCAR simulators on television. So that type of advancement is going to be important. I think the other thing that we need to think about policy-wise is as automation comes in, the Case tractor, I know they have debuted tractors that have shown fully autonomous, or they track along with an operator, as well as grain carts that sync to combines. How will those be transported on the roadways? Will there be an opportunity for a driver to be in one vehicle and the autonomous vehicle to tag right along? And those types of policy decisions are still being discussed, and we certainly enjoy being a part of that. But that's a little bit down the road, but as we're all here today, is tasked to look toward the future.
If I may jump in, yeah, it's actually here today. We believe or are putting a lot of investment into autonomous tractors and combines and the like. We see that as the future. Of course, that is only going to be possible with broadband. widely accessible across the United States. Relative to how they could be driven on roads, we still need to certainly work that out as our focus has been on how can they be utilized to make farms more safe, have farmers be able to multitask and do other things as they're either seeding or plowing their fields with the autonomous vehicle, and what skills they'll need to be able to operate that and to operate that type of equipment. My understanding is they're very popular, and the current farmers are very excited about the prospect of that technology. Again, only worthwhile if we've got the broadband connectivity to allow them to manage that. But certainly would be interested to also understand what we're going to be doing in the schools to address that level of technology, which seems like Star Trek compared to where we have been, but it's really right around the corner. So I think that is, to Brian's point, something that I think we need to look at again in looking at school curriculum and how we can address that so that we're making tech in our rural communities as important as it seems to be in some of our more populous cities.
Good comments, Tim. Did anybody else want to join? Are we gonna, it looks like Chuck Connor.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you. Following on this theme of technology, let me just say that I think probably one of the areas where maybe the criticism falls on ourselves, but certainly as a group of folks interested in rural America, we can collaborate on these things, is just this general notion that I think in the past, agriculture and food work has sort of been, if you will, kind of the low step on the stepping stool, if you will, and you do that. But if you can go on to something else, you're headed in the right direction. And I sort of take the exact opposite approach on this in talking to a lot of folks, because this is the true growth industry in the world. I mean, we have challenges in the future to meet the demands of a growing population here in the US, but certainly all over the planet. And this is a growth sector. And it's a sector that even in the depths of COVID and all of that mess, there were problems, and we can discuss those. But for the most part, in food and agriculture, payrolls were met, people were employed, people were fed. This is a remarkable industry. It's a remarkable growth industry, and it ought to be one that people want to desire and train to get into, not one that they want to step out of. And I think part of our issue for the future of work is to change that dynamic.
I totally agree. Totally agree. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. First of all, in the chat, we are following comments as well. And for Chairman Scott, there's actually a comment about WIOA and HBCUs. And so for those who put that information, we're also taking that information as well. So check out the chat. And Chairman Scott, I'm going to ask a question. And then if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to jump in as well. My question relates to, and it was touched on some by Ms. Tellefson Torres about just working conditions and just extreme heat, but the issue of extreme weather and climate change. I know in my own state, I had a farmer tell me that it has actually altered some of the timing of when they plant, and that it's actually had an impact on the work that they are doing in their farm. And I'm just curious if any of you on the panel could just speak to how does extreme weather, climate change impact the future of rural development and agriculture jobs, and what adjustments do we need to make to workforce development as a result? And I hope someone has some wisdom here. Don't tell me I stumped the panel. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, Adam.
It's interesting here to be thinking about, what does the impact of climate change, because so often we encounter people who say, well, like, why do we need this fancy weather station? Why do we need data? Phil over there has been working in these fields for the last 30 years, and it's sometimes hard to communicate that the reality that someone's going to experience in a particular field is changing. And so, for example, in California, fires are sort of commonplace in Napa Valley. It didn't used to be that workers had to face, threats of fire in their sort of harvest planning. And so I think what's clear is that a lot of people need to be more agile in terms of the annual calendar and be thinking more on the ball. And so, although I love all the kind of wisdom that comes from experience, this is an area where sort of like youth tech orientation, data literacy and whatnot really gives some skills to the fresh faces out in the farm world.
Excellent. Well, now we have a couple of hands here. Okay, we're going to go with Ms. Torres, Mr. Holyvote, and then Mr. Connor.
Thank you so much. Well, from the UFW Foundation's perspective, climate change can really reduce the amount of time that workers have to harvest before the crops spoil. And, in the meantime, many workers are now getting exposed, as others have mentioned, to dangerous smoke, the intensity and the temperatures, which increase their risk to heat illness, as I mentioned in my comments. So I think we have to really focus on how we also keep workers safe, right? So it's not just about the crops. I think as we're thinking about technology and how that can be utilized to address climate change, you also have to ensure that farm workers are part of the discussion, making sure that their input is informing the process. They are professionals. They know what they're doing on the ground. They can tell you there are more hot days right now than there were 10 years ago. And they can tell you very concrete details about the crop that they are very familiar with. So it's utilizing them as the professionals that they are and keeping them safe as well. And I should mention that the bill that I was alluding to in legislation is the Asunción Valdivia Heat Illness and Fatality Prevention Act of 2021. That's the heat bill that would make sure that we have the protections that are needed for farm workers, and the DOL is now considering some options here for standards and protections.
Great, thank you so much, John.
To take this in a slightly different direction, at least in agriculture, we happen to be fortunate that we work in a field where we can actually sequester carbon. So there's a tremendous opportunity between the intersection between technology and agriculture for us to be involved in being a big part of the solution to our climate challenges. I think it also provides an opportunity for us to look at new ways of investment in rural America because of that, new job opportunities in rural America because of that. So that is an area that I think has a lot of our farmers excited. And to the extent that it's possible for Congress to try to make the trading of carbon credits more systematic, easier for small producers to get involved with, all those things are appealing for us as we look towards the future.
Thank you. And Chuck.
John said exactly what I wanted to say.
Okay.
You can't say it better.
Great. Thank you for your efficiency. All right, I'll turn it back over. Representative Scott, Mr. Chairman, did you have a question for the panel before Representative Stile goes back?
I wanted to respond to the question in the chat because the chat points out that funding for job training under WIOA hasn't kept pace. She's absolutely right. And that's why we have significant funding in the reconciliation package right so far for WIOA. If you're going to have substantial training, it costs substantial money, and the WIOA boards are only able to really accommodate about a third of the people they would like to, and that's due to funding. And so we beefed that up. She mentioned that short term isn't enough. Absolutely right about that. That's why there's a significant investment in registered apprenticeships, which are generally several years long, and sector-based and dislocated workers. A lot of people have lost their jobs during the pandemic. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs in sectors that are carbon-based. There are going to be fewer jobs in that area, but more jobs in other areas. We need to make sure that those people get trained so they can keep a great job. And she points out youth, with a lot of investments in youth, Job Corps, Youth Bill, and youth apprenticeships. All of those are in the reconciliation plan, but I can tell you that they're all being cut because the top line is being cut and everything's gonna suffer. She also mentioned investments in colleges that serve people who are generally overlooked, the minority serving institutions, community colleges, historically Black colleges and universities. We have put substantial funding into those areas in the last 2 years, and there's, as you know, free community college will make a lot of those opportunities available, and that's actually where a lot of job training, good job training can take place. Virginia has a lot of short-term programs that get people off onto the tracks that they need to go on to get into great careers. They've tracked it and shown that people who get into the 8 to 16 week programs can increase their income 25, 50, even 100%. And those are the kinds of programs that community colleges are good at a reasonable fee. So I want to thank you and Brian for all the work that you've been doing, making sure these investments get made, that we're pointed in the right direction. So I just encourage you to keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Maybe I'll throw a question out there. I think, Alex Camerdell, that you brought up a really good point earlier about access to capital. We're talking about a lot of the technologies that are coming into play in rural America that are essential to remain competitive and to compete, whether or not that's automating your dairy farm, whether or not that's investing in different products that are requiring broadband, et cetera. And if I could, and I'm happy to let you speak again on the topic, Alex, but maybe ask the question to Chuck Connor and then open it up to others. The role of access to capital for these reasonably significant investments in our rural communities, which maybe historically weren't as quite as capital intensive, always a capital intensive process in the world of farming, but all the more so now. What are our people kind of on the ground experiencing from a context of access to capital to be able to leverage their farm and their operations? Then open the floor from there if others have comments.
Congressman, I'll take a first shot at this and just say that part of our portfolio includes representation of the Farm Credit System, which is a $300 billion lending organization for agricultural credit as well as agribusiness. And so this is something we monitor very, very closely. I will tell you right now that generally speaking, the credit worthiness and the credit portfolio of most of food and agriculture is in very, very good shape. And this is, something, you use historical ratios. Those of us that have been around a long time remember the 1980s when the credit circumstance was just dismal across all of agriculture. We never want to see that happen again. And so, we are in better times just in terms of balance sheets and cash flows. Now, having said that, I am going to say that we will also acknowledge, and our Farm Credit banks do a great deal towards trying to reach out to those that have difficulty obtaining credit. And we are the first to acknowledge that there are regions and sectors within the agricultural world that have historically had trouble getting access to credit. And we just sort of try and chip away at those one by one, but at the same time too know that we've got a heck of a long way to still go. And it does tend to divide up regionally in certain parts of the country. And we just need to stay at this and stay diligent. And certainly there's a role here for USDA Rural Development and USDA Farm Service Agency to play in not only prodding us this direction, but in some cases partnering with us to make sure we've got the ability to get in there and make loans where sometimes it has historically been difficult.
I saw hands from Mark Rembrandt and then Chuck Spencer. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just flag another type of capital that I think is often overlooked in rural places, which is equity capital to scale businesses. So I think when we think about the future of work and the future of economic opportunity in rural places, we need new businesses in rural places that are scalable in nature and actually are able to create new employment in rural places. And when we look at access to capital for, a entrepreneur in a rural place who has a scalable business, accessing venture capital markets from rural America is extremely difficult. I think less than 1% of venture capital goes to rural America. And so that's a huge barrier to a new generation of high-tech employers taking root in rural communities and creating the kind of high technology jobs that benefit people, all industries and rural communities broadly. So there are examples, I think, of how the federal government is supporting this. So the EDA's Build to Scale Venture Challenge is a program that we've worked with communities on, building seed funds, local rural seed funds to invest in startups. USDA's Rural Business Investment Program is another example, but I think that group of entrepreneurs, which we see as incredibly critical to the future of rural America, often gets left out in access to capital conversation. And so just wanted to make sure that we include them too in thinking about all the types of capital that really need to flow into rural communities to set them up for the future of work.
Great comments, Dr. Rembert, in particular on the importance of making sure venture capital is flowing not into just our largest cities, but into all of America, in particular rural America. That's very, very well said and a really important topic. Did Chuck Spencer, did you want to also comment on this? Did I see your hand?
I would. Yes, you did. And thank you. And your questions right on cue, along with the presenters here, comments to this point. And the addition I want to add is that beginning farmer programs have been very helpful. We talked, and John referenced climate change and the opportunity for carbon sequestration on the farm. That can take practice change at farm level. Practice change means technology and equipment. And as we've all been talking about, the challenge of getting the capital to make the investment for these types of changes when demanded by consumers, possibly policy changes, these need to be synchronized with the requests that are being made and the advancements that we're making. And I even feel pretty strongly about how the technology we've talked about and access to broadband and computing speeds would be a draw for venture capital, because agriculture as a renewable resource program, whether it's fuels, whether it is plastics, whether it's the future of food, we're going to see innovation happen in rural areas. We make the complex seem easy. And I think there's returns on investment that can be found with the right type of encouragement.
I saw a hand from great comment. I saw a hand from Dr. Adam Wolf, and then maybe one more final question from Lisa Blunt-Rochester before we wrap up. I want to make sure we're on time, but Adam, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, this is an area that I'm really passionate about. Something like, north of 95% of all venture capital goes to white males living in San Francisco, Boston, or New York. We were beneficiaries of two really valuable programs. One is private, called Village Capital, that is oriented entirely around bringing kind of entrepreneurial skills, like how do venture capitalists think, to people who are outside of that traditional group of people who's applying to venture capital. But also the National Science Foundation has a program called I-Corps that was just instrumental to my decision to start a business and to have skills. And one of the things that is distinct about NSF, as opposed to all the other venture investors, is they really have a US national focus, especially in rural areas. And so both of these programs, I know from personal experience, invested in entrepreneurs who have founded second businesses and who go on to create a number of jobs and really are an engine of the US economy. So I'm really passionate about that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for that answer as well, because it kind of ties together some of the things that Chuck Connor mentioned about plugging away, but really we're in an inflection moment where some of these things have been just structural and institutional. And that's why it's really good to have USDA on the call as well to hear this directly. Also, Brian Fitzpatrick, who was on with us earlier, he and I have a bill called the SOAR Act, which is focused on small business development and making sure that those dollars, we say it in our bill, that they go to those like 3 or 4 different, Silicon Valley and New York, but that our rural communities and that the communities that typically don't get access to capital, we need to make sure that we give them those resources so that they could soar. And then the last point I just wanted to mention was on the whole piece on education, youth, workforce development. There is another bill that we have called the Jobs Act with Stephen Horsford and others that is focused on short-term Pell Grants, because we know not everybody needs 4 years of college, and that we need to be able to get people those resources that can be those short-term projects, programs that get them right into the fields of work that are the jobs of today and tomorrow. And I guess as my last thing that I would share, or question that I would ask, is almost to every one of you on the panel, if you were to give us your top 1 or 2 priorities, if you were able to speak to every member of Congress and you wanted them to know, we got to do this right now, because we know in the last recession, rural America was not able to get what it needed to rebound as quickly as it should, and that we don't want to see that happen in this one. So these are my top 1 or 2 priorities. So if we could just go around the Zoom room here, and I'll start at my top here with Chuck Connor.
1 is tough, but I would, in this space.
You could do 2.
But, give us some relief on the immigration front. This is a big deal.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck. And next I've got Alex.
Even 2 is tough. I think the WIOA reauthorization presents a huge opportunity, and I hope Congress doesn't squander it in terms of contributing new investments and flexibilities that allow programs in rural areas to expand and create more training opportunities, like employer-sponsored training, on-the-job training, is of course the expansion of apprenticeship. So that's a huge priority there. And then again, back to the capital piece, thinking generally about building wealth in rural America, we've got to find ways to knock down barriers to capital so that folks can generate wealth opportunities beyond just for now, but also for their kids and their families forever. So
thanks, Alex. Mark, you're next.
Investing and supporting rural communities for sort of transitioning their entire economies to the digital economy. It's a system. It's not just one thing. It's a lot of different pieces. And the other is WIOA and really increasing flexibility. Many rural communities are limited by responding to the needs of local businesses. They need to be responding to the businesses, to the opportunities of the future, not just the opportunities that are in their communities today. So creating more flexibility for that.
Excellent. Tim?
A couple quick ones, and you touched on it earlier. Technical training, I've been beating that drum, I think, pretty loudly, not only at perhaps the community college level, which I know is in existence, but even if we can push that down to the high school and have high schoolers ready to join the workforce, as opposed to having to make that reach or decision to go to a community college where they might be perhaps a little anxious to do something like that.
Great. And number two?
The earlier we can hit them, better. Secondly, broadband throughout the rural communities. Most
great.
definitely.
Thanks, Tim. John.
I'll add a vote to Chuck's on ag labor.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. You're going to give both of your votes to ag labor. Okay. And Chuck Spencer.
Supply chain resiliency. We still have challenges with the most basic of parts distributions, as well as supply chain distributions. And then I have to mention ag labor.
All right. All right. Adam.
Get right with carbon. There's so much of where the decarbonization is going to happen that's going to touch rural America and create rural jobs. But it's also just really important for the next 100 years of Americans to address this issue, and touches on energy, treasury, agriculture. It's really all encompassing. And so I'd be really pleased if any more attention could be drawn to it.
Awesome. And Farah?
Well, you already know my modernization request, but on the other side, I would say, we have a lot of program funds for infrastructure, laying the bricks, laying the fiber, but we would love to see more on the technical assistance side to really strengthen those local organizations and make sure they can get ready to take on the loans down the line.
Great, great. Well, I know, and Diana, I don't know if you want to give the last word from me.
Sure. Legalization for farm workers, and then overtime pay for farm workers to promote the economic security, since the administration has already begun to work on heat.
Excellent, excellent. I'll turn it back over to you, Representative Stile.
Thank you very much. This was a productive conversation about how we prepare workers for the jobs of the future, in particular in our rural communities. 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 Americans, 60 million people are in rural America and are dependent on us putting forward the policies that move our country forward. Often and not often enough do we have Democrats and Republicans coming and sitting at the table. We had groups of members with us, but I can't thank Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester enough for your leadership on this caucus, as we really try to solve the biggest problems in front of us. And so I appreciate everybody's participation and look forward to our next meeting.
I do too. I'm going to keep my comments short, but I don't know if Mr. Chairman, if you wanted to say a word before we wrap it all up.
No, just congratulations on you and Brian doing such a good job. Keep us posted.
Teamwork makes the dream work. I want to thank Brian and his team with Will and Agatha on our team for their hard work. I want to thank each of you. As Brian said, it's really a great thing when you can't tell which party the person's from, because they're all saying agriculture, or they're all saying immigration, or they're all saying workforce training. That's really important in this time. And so we just need to make sure that we continue this conversation, that we also, and thank you so much for sharing information in the chat box, everybody, and that you stay glued and tuned in. This is our opportunity. This is our moment. And we want to make sure that all of America, especially rural America, also gets its fair share. So thank you so much for joining us, and on to the future of work. Thanks, Brian.
Take care.
Take care, everybody.